Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to this local pension board meeting. We start off on agenda item 1. Apologies for absence. We do have one apology today, which is Stephen Agreement, but everybody else is present. If we go on to item 2, emergency evacuation procedure. Do you want to briefly cover off?
I will do. No planned fire alarm today, so it will be real if we hear anything, and just follow us through the fire exits and out the building.
Okay, on to item 3, public access. We haven't received any public access statements.
But should we be on the off chance anyone is watching this on the video, they're not able to hear us, it's not even right.
That's a good point. Yeah, so on item 3, public access statements, we haven't received one, so we haven't received any comments from the public. On to item 4, so this is Chair's business. So to confirm that this board is taking place at a face-to-face meeting, we're also recording it for the benefit of members of the public. If we just go around and do introductions, I think probably the easiest way to do it is we just go around clockwise, we just go around everybody at once, randomly around in terms of people's different roles. So we start off.
Assistant Chief Bar Officer Richard Welch. Assistant Chief Bar Officer Stephen. Steve Smith, Councillor of Bristol City Council and member of the Avon.
Andrew Farley, Bristol City Councillor, member of the Avon Authority.
Mark Jacobson, Scheme Representative.
Nikki Russell, Technical Compliance Manager, Avon Pension Fund.
Anna Cat, Member Services Manager at Avon Pension Fund.
Good morning, Amanda Brown, Clerk and Monitoring Officer, Avon Fire Authority.
Morning, Angie Feeney, I'm the Director of Corporate Services here at Avon Fire Rescue Service.
I don't think I said my name actually. I'm Andy Gilliam. I'm the local pension board independent chair. Okay, thank you everyone. As a reminder to use the microphones, probably should mention that at the start. We missed the first couple of items on that, but it's okay. In terms of voting, there's a couple of items where we will vote. So we'll typically look at votes against first and abstentions, and then any votes for. We'll just do that on the items where the vote is necessary on the bottom of those items. Declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest in the items? No? Okay. Otherwise we'll move on to item 6, so minutes of the last meeting. So is there any comments first of all on the minutes before we go to the okay, we have somebody proposed and second, please. Thank you. Second. Okay, it was passed. I'll sign it again. Okay, on to item 7. So, impact of independent governance review and consequential changes. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and morning all members. So I've got a report before you today. It's report number 7 in your bundle, and it's at page 13 of the bundle. My report sets out the impact of a recent independent governance review. So that was presented to the Fire Authority earlier this year in April, and there are some parts of that in governance review which impact on local pension board business, so hence this report is in front of you today. I will come back to the recommendations at the end, so if you turn to page 14 please in your bundle, and I'll deal with the background first. So Avon Fire Authority invited the Local Government Association to give the Fire Authority some advice about future governance to make sure it was fit for purpose, and that resulted in us appointing independent experts to do an independent governance review, and the report of those experts dated the 30th of March 23, which is in Appendix 1, which hopefully is in your papers at page 19, was considered by the Fire Authority at their meeting on the 25th of April, and at that meeting, all 12 recommendations were accepted. So there's going to be a number of changes which are going to be brought in 2 phases. So paragraph 3.2, I explained that recommendation 1 of the governance review was to change the governance structure of Avon Fire Authority. So we've gone down from 3 committees to 2, and I should mention here that that also meant a shuffle of lead directors as well. So you will notice today you have as your new lead director, Assistant Chief Fire Officer Welsh, and Angie Feeney has kindly come along today to support because she was the outgoing lead director for the local pension board. So in future you will have a new lead director. What I explain in paragraph 3.2 is that the terms of reference for the new Policy and Resources Committee now include discharging the authority's responsibilities as scheme manager and scheme employer for the relevant pension schemes. So what that means for you is that when you present your annual report, it no longer goes to the full Fire Authority, but instead goes to the Policy and Resources Committee, and also any strategic decision making which you think the Fire Authority should make will then also be considered by the Policy and Resources Committee. So such things as immediate detriment decisions and the like, okay? The other change that was made is that under the scheme of delegation, the Chief Fire Officer now determines stage 1 pension internal dispute resolution cases, and that should hopefully speed up the process a bit. And then it's only stage 2 which go to members of PRC, so there will be a small subcommittee formed to deal with stage 2 disputes. And then the Audit Committee also has a role, if you require it to, in relation to assurance matters for the work of pension. So I have put at Appendix 2 the changes that were made to the internal dispute resolution procedure. So that document had already been approved by this board on the 15th of February. So no substantive changes have been made to that document. The only changes that have been made is to reflect the new levels at which determinations are made. So you've now got Chief Fire Officer at stage 1 and the PRC subcommittee at stage 2. So really, although it's at Appendix 2, it's just for information. It's not really for anything to be approved. They were just changes that had to be made to align the two things. Okay. So going on to key considerations, on page 15 of my report, paragraph 5.1, the governance review, although it didn't specifically make a recommendation about the work of the local pension board, it made some comments about that work in the narrative of the report. So if I refer you please, it's page 9 to 10 of the Appendix 1, which is on page 27 of your bundle, at the bottom of page 27. So what the governance experts said was they noted that meetings of this board are currently held in public, and they said that there was no requirement for this to be the case, okay? So what they said was this is a non-decision making advisory board which supports the Fire Authority to fulfil its obligations, and there's no material public interest in favour of the board operating at the same levels as you would do a committee or the Fire Authority. So therefore, what the consultants suggested was that we could reduce the administrative burden associated with supporting the local pension board by removing the requirement for those meetings to be held in public. So I've put that quote at paragraph 5.1 of my report. It's worth pointing out also at 5.2 that it is just an advisory board, it's not a committee as defined in the Local Government Act 1972, and therefore there is no legal requirement for us to publish the papers, give access to the papers, give access to members of the public to these meetings. We have done until now, but this is a useful point at which to decide how we want to do business in the future. Okay. I've also included there an explanation of the degrees of transparency that would be required under the Public Services Pension Act 2013. And you'll see I've put some bullet points at 5.3. So we should publish who the board members are, who represents the scheme members, and also the terms of reference for the board. And I can confirm that all that information is already in the public domain and on our website, so the public can access that information. And then 5.4, which goes over the page onto page 16 of my report. basically says the same thing by the pension regulator. You know, this is the minimum information you would expect to be published, and it's the terms and conditions of the board, who the board members are, who they represent, the pension board appointment process, and so on. So pretty much the same information. So what I've presented for you at paragraph 5.5 is basically three options for how you run the board in the future. So option one is you continue to treat the board in the same way as a committee, publish all the papers, allow the public to attend meetings and record all board meetings for the public to view. Option two is you follow the recommendation of the governance review and reflect the advisory status of the board and basically stop all of that activity and no longer publish board papers or hold public meetings because there's no legitimate public interest in those meetings. Or option three, which is what I'm going to present to you as a recommendation today, is a sort of a midway point, if you like. So it maintains some transparency by publishing all the minutes of the meetings of the local pension board and publishing the annual reports of the board. So the public would not be invited to attend the meetings, the papers wouldn't be published, and the meetings would no longer be recorded. And it's worth me adding here, and something I didn't mention in the report, that of course where there is an important pension matter which then goes on to PLC, all those papers are published, the meetings are recorded, so the discussion by the decision-making body is fully accessible. So it's only this advisory board which will be treated in a different way. Okay? So that's one of the key things that I invite you to discuss today. And then in paragraph 5.7, I explained that this governance review has almost presented you with an opportunity. Let's look at your terms of reference and see whether they can be improved. So in Appendix 3, I've provided the current terms of reference, and you will see there's a number of track changes. So the track changes fall into two categories really. The track changes that needed to be made to reflect PLC as your main committee rather than fire authority. So governance review requirements. But also, while we're at it, let's simplify the language and make them easier to understand and rectify any issues that we were having. So, for example, at the end of this document, there's a whole section on appointment processes and also the independent chair job and person specification. All of that was very ambiguous and not clear in the last version. So as the pension regulator say, that's something that's important. We understand how the appointment process should run. That is now dealt with in a lot more detail in this redraft. So everything is there, pages 49 to 57. We've retained the track changes in that document so you can see where the changes have been made. Obviously, if you agree those changes today, a very pretty version will appear on our website, which will look very much like the terms of reference for the other new committees. So this is a pretty ugly document, I appreciate that. So it's not presented to you for its beauty, it's presented to you for hopefully the fact that it's common sense. So I'll go back to the recommendations and then I'll take any questions that you might have. So the recommendations are at paragraph 2 on page 13. So the local pension board is asked to firstly note the report of their consulting solutions dated March 23, which is Appendix 1. B is note Avon Borough Authority's new governance arrangements in relation to pension matters which are now delegated to the new Policy and Resources Committee, so just note that updated position. C, note the updated Avon Fire and Rescue Service internal dispute resolution procedure. Now that's already been introduced, it's in Appendix 2. The reason being it was overdue, it needed to be introduced straight away. We made the necessary changes for you. D is consider and adopt the recommendations of the governance review in relation to the work of the local pension board, and in future, and I've assumed here in my recommendation the option I've presented to you, which is option 3, which is publish the minutes of all local pension board meetings and the local pension board's annual report outlining the work, but hold the meetings themselves in private. And then E, recommend to the Fire Authority via the Policy and Resources Committee, so papers being published in about 2 days' time, the PLC, that they adopt for me on your behalf the new terms of reference of the local pension board, which aligns to those new governance arrangements and adds a bit of clarity. So if we need to make any changes to these, we need to do that today so that we can get this in the pack for PLC in a few days' time so they can formally sign those off. Okay. So sorry, that was a bit of a rattle through my report, so apologies. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Amanda, for that summary. Just to say, I'm really pleased to see the internal dispute resolution now has the CFO as stage 1 decision maker. I think having committees at both stages was not a good idea, so I think I'm really pleased to see that change. Also, with options 2 and 3, I'm actually quite open about either of those options. I just wonder why you want to, or why you prefer option 3, a kind of sort of halfway house, as it were. Is it because we're afraid of not being transparent? You know, we've had issues in the past, and do we want to ensure maximum transparency? You know, because obviously the recommendations are we don't need to do this. I'm just wondering why you're preferring that option 3.
I think when we were thinking about this and the impact of the governance review, we discussed it with your independent chair, who may well want to add to this. I don't want to represent his views, but we had a long chat about what does the law say we should do versus what we have been doing. And it just felt a big jump to go from all to nothing. And so we are complying with the law in terms of the information which is already available on our website. But if we had both the minutes and the annual report, we felt that the information was easily accessible, that people then didn't have to search for it, because otherwise you'd have to go through quite a lot to find what had been happening throughout the last year, for example. So it was to sort of go that extra mile and make just that transparency and that accessibility a bit easier, really. But it may be that the independent chair will have a view.
Yeah, I had a comment on that. Yeah, I mean, when this first came up, I did give it a little bit of thought, really, before really coming to my own sort of conclusion on it. Personally, I'm very much to the viewpoint that, you know, as a public body, transparency is important. And transparency is important to demonstrate what you're doing and why. And the reason I guess I was comfortable with the option 3 was because I felt that extra level of transparency that we're currently giving is not really being taken advantage of, and it's creating various complications. So therefore, I was comfortable removing that, but to some extent I didn't really want to remove too much more than that. Because sometimes the transparency is just giving confidence that I think untoward is happening, really. You know, sometimes people think, well, what are you hiding away in secret meetings or something? You're saying secret sheets. Yeah, and it's not like that at all. There's just a sort of practical middle ground which we were going for. The other thing which I did do before this meeting that took a while to get a response, so it wasn't included in the pack, is I did, because in my experience, I'm aware of one local pension board which is private, but they have a different setup. So the one which I was aware of where it was private setup, they weren't linked to a local authority, and this was an LGPS one. So I did ask the LGA for just comment and advice, and they in turn asked the pension regulator, actually, they didn't know they were going to do, but they did ask, and we did get a response back from them. And they were basically comfortable with what we were proposing and what we were doing. I think the regulator's viewpoint was, and they said that some of them are public already, some are private across the country, they're aware, but they didn't really have a problem with that so much. Their viewpoint is more, does it work effectively? That's what they consider to be the highest priority. So that's what they came back with. As I said, that came back with us. The papers are being distributed, or around the time we were distributing them, so it was too late to kind of mention it, which is why I mentioned it verbally. But as I said, that was my viewpoint, and as I said, we did have this discussion outside of the meeting, and we sort of felt comfortable with this as a middle ground. As I said, transparency is important. It's important to me from a personal viewpoint, and I think this strikes the right balance. So that's my view. Yes.
I think also from the user and member perspective, whilst it's not a decision-making body, there's a lot going on around pensions at the moment, in particular in terms of the various different remedies. So this is then a further source for them to have a look at what's going on in terms of the legislation, what's going on in terms of state of the service prep. And of course, we communicate that in other ways, but again, you're being transparent and helping kind of educate our members, both retired and internal, on what's happening with both of those ones. I don't necessarily think once we're over the other side of remedy that there's not potential to look at this again as an option, but I think the combination of all of those kind of things, I think, are what informed that particular recommendation.
Yeah, I think maybe a step-by-step gradual approach might be the right way to go rather than suddenly all and then nothing. And I guess it's not a huge administrative burden in terms of publishing the minutes and the annual report. So I'm happy to go for option 3. Can I also just chuck something else into the mix as well? If the meetings are no longer going to be held in public, which I'm absolutely in support of, do we need to meet face to face? Can we have a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting, which can be recorded, of course? There are lots of benefits for meeting online. There's environmental benefit that we're not all travelling in our vehicles to get down here a couple of times a year, and also, of course, there are time benefits as well. Just something to throw out there to get opinions from other people and see what they think.
I would need to check the legal position in relation to that. I don't think there is a need for them to be, but I defer to a pension expert about this. So yeah, absolutely, it's a really good point to make. If we can reduce the burden across the board. So can we take that away as an action to look into that, please? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
What I was going to say is I agree with what you said, option 3, in the sense of still offers a bit of transparency then to people when Andrew said people being able to look at that online and just see those changes themselves. As you said, it's not a complete closed door, people can see there's some transparency there, but as you said, it doesn't mean we have a support option 3 itself.
On the point about holding meetings virtually, I'm fairly certain that is possible because I only know of a number of places who did it. It also came up during the pandemic because there was a discussion then about what meetings could be held publicly and which ones couldn't. And the government actually had to change the law on a temporary basis in relation to formal committee meetings. But at that point in time, it came up about local pension boards, and then it was confirmed that local pension boards did come under the same legislation, and therefore they were able to be held virtually with no change to the law. And then I know of some places where that's carried on being the case since then. So there is a possibility. I think it's something which involves consideration. I mean, yes, there are all those benefits you said. I think on the flip side, it's some of the potential disadvantages is technology is not always completely reliable.
We have that problem here.
Yeah. Sometimes we've had that given the benefits of recording, but obviously from a physical point of view, we can all hear each other and that works fine. And I think there's sometimes a bit of a feeling whether the discussion flows quite as well if you have it virtually. So I think those are considerations, but I'm not saying no to it. I'm just saying that there's considerations both ways. But it's a valid point about travel up and the thing to do in person. I think that's something to go away. Certainly go away and think about. Other questions or comments? Yes.
Echo what everyone else said, quite happy with the option 3. I think most of that stuff gets published anyway because it goes onto the agenda from another meeting in PRC, so it's there anyway, so no problem with that. And I would also support virtual meetings if we can make them work. Sensible and pragmatic thing to do.
Any comments, members, on the track changes to the terms of reference? Because that's quite a key document for you. I didn't know if there was anything there that, it was, before my arrival in post, the previous standing clerk spent quite a lot of time on these terms of reference. So when I arrived, they were quite new, so I was told, you haven't got to worry about those, they've recently been reviewed. So this was our first opportunity. I worked alongside your chair just to make sure we made some pragmatic and sensible track changes. So I don't think there's anything there which should cause problems, but just this is your chance before it goes to committee to make any comments at all.
No, actually, pragmatic and sensible, the 2 words I was about to use, so that's that with it.
You're happy?
Yeah.
Okay, super.
I suggest, unless anybody objects, that we just take a vote on those together on D and E, because it sounds like we have support. Doesn't sound like we've got any votes against or abstentions, so votes for. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, members.
Okay, we'll move on to item 8, so regulatory and legislative update, and also welcome, thank you, earlier, so welcome to the meeting as well. Okay, over to you.
Thank you and good morning. So the regulatory update for the last few months is on item 8 and pages 59 to 66 in the pack. There for noting, but I wanted to pull out a few things that will have and will impact the administration service and members. So I believe the key things are that I want to mention are changes to the scape discount rate. For those who are not aware, that will impact it's the funding of the contributions within the unfunded schemes, but it also meant that the actuarial factors that we use in members' calculations are changing. We've had a lot of the GAD have been drip feeding us these factors, which have been basically on hold since the 30th of March. So this has impacted the service because we've had to put on hold certain types of processes and calculations that we're doing for the firefighters. They have now been released, but unfortunately the way they've been released to the software provider means I've had to update them manually, which means we're still awaiting a lot of these factors to come through so we can start processing some of these benefits for members. So that's impacting members and the service. A couple of notable other changes in pension taxation in terms of the Chancellor's budget in the spring. Not so much, these were effective from the 6th of April 23, where the lifetime allowance has been abolished and equally the annual allowance has been increased to £60,000, which will have a benefit on members' pensions. Hopefully less members will be caught by the annual allowance. Obviously still for 22-23 the allowance is still at £40,000, so members will still be likely to be impacted, especially those members in the 92 scheme who were caught unfairly. Final couple of things I wanted to mention, the dashboard, which is going to affect all pension schemes. They're pushing back the connection date, the latest connection date to the 31st of October 26. We're still yet to know when public sector schemes are to connect, and that's something we're still waiting guidance on in terms of when that will happen. Happy to take any questions.
Just have one question on the scape factors, which I know the position for LGPS. I'm familiar with what Hayward's have done for fire. So which processes is it holding up at the moment?
So at the moment, the process it's holding up are your what we call CTVs, transfer values, divorce and refunds. That would be for the care scheme mostly, refunds. We've also recently been advised that there are new factors coming in for early retirements, which will they were effective from the 3rd of July. So with these new factors, we're having to put in a temporary workaround to calculate members' early retirements in terms of rather than put them on hold, we're going to carry on with the new factors that have been released but not yet in the system.
Do we know roughly how many members are affected by the cases which are being put on hold? So the first ones you mentioned.
Off the top of my head, no, I don't know. We can find out. For you.
Yes.
Where we've got things that are sort of in progress or on hold, like the scape rates and the dashboard, I don't think there's any work happening on the dashboard at the moment, but what impact does that have on handover to the new scheme administrator as and when that needs to happen in the next, it's within the next 12 months, isn't it now?
We're hoping to have all those backlogs to be by then. I mean, in terms of I certainly will work from fire and the LGPS, that the numbers are larger for the government scheme as to the fire, the outstanding numbers we have for fire, we certainly will have them do it.
Okay, so there isn't, well, we don't believe there's a risk that things get dropped, that are on hold get dropped in the process of that handover.
No, certainly.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay, let's move on to
Good morning, thank you. Yeah, just the administration update. So hybrid working remains in place. Oh, sorry, perhaps. Apologies. So hybrid working remains in place across the administration. Most of the team work in 2 to 3 days in the office. End of year contributions posting has been completed and work is underway to issue the active annual benefit statements by the statutory deadline of the 31st of August. The active statement will need reviewing before circulating to Avon Fire and Rescue for sign off. Deferred statements are being issued this week. With performance, there were 3 cases, retirement cases, that had fallen below the agreed KPIs due to a number of complexities. One of them being a manual calculation required due to the change in computation factors on the 3rd of April. Tax charge as well. There was calculation and a member decision pending. And a change in the management team where the pensions manager retired and the new operations manager came into post. So there was a bit of a delay around the sign-off with cases there. The team itself, it remains under-resourced, carrying a number of vacancies, and recruitment is starting to take place. We are hoping to have greater success due to market supplements that will be applied to most grades. The pensions payroll team leader left after being in post for a number of years at the end of March, and extensive training was undertaken with existing team leaders to ensure the payroll function was not adversely affected. We have used an external agency to recruit a new payroll team leader, and who is now in post. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions? Thanks first. Could you just expand on the active annual benefit statements in terms of just what there's left to do? Almost, I'm mindful of almost because of the cycle of the local pension board, by the time we meet again, the deadline will be passed, just to give us a bit of assurance that we're targeting. What's holding up basically completed?
So currently nothing's really holding it up. The active ones have been extracted. They're undergoing their checks at the moment. What we haven't done is sent the paperwork across to Avon Fire and Rescue just for sign off. Just need to update a few things around the wording that we're using, just to make sure it's up to date. And as soon as that's ready, we'll get it across to Avon Fire and Rescue just for sign off. In terms of what's holding it up, there isn't anything as such. The extract's been completed, validation checks are going ahead. Once we've got sign off, we are on target to complete that. So.
Okay, that's right, thank you. You explained about the failures for the retirement. Because it would be useful to know, I appreciate you may not have this in front of you, but it would be useful to know as part of the package in general, obviously bearing in mind that it's probably one more meeting with his administrator. It'd be useful to know how much they failed by, because in some ways something failing obviously by 1 day or 2 days is not as much a concern as if it fails by 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or whatever. Do you know that for those particular ones, or even if it's just approximate?
I know with one of them it was about 3 weeks over. So the person retired, I think, on the 7th of April, but they didn't receive their benefits until the beginning of May. And that's one of the cases. The other cases, I would have to look at the detail. And like I say, one of them was to do with tax. And so the member had to make a decision around whether they wanted the scheme to embrace scheme pays or not. So even though there was a slight delay there, it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was material, and the person that was involved was aware of the delay, so there wasn't, it was down to the member decision that we're noting that one. The other case, the third case, I would have to get back to you exactly how much over that one was.
Yeah, and I think that's a valid point, because it's not sometimes always, the other thing about sometimes how much it fails by is also what the position of the member was, and if it's sometimes a little bit delayed by their own actions, or that they're okay with it being delayed for some other reason because they want to avoid a problem further down the line, then it's just useful to have a little of that detail, because it provides a little bit of a context to just what's otherwise a bit of a dry percentage. So.
Yeah, and that can be added in, incorporated into the report if that's useful.
Final thing I have is, sorry, this is a slight we've had it as an action for some time to have the conditional one, and it's not there, and the common one's dropped off as well. I think I understood from previous meetings that you were going to be having some improved software, possibly Insight, which would give you that information for these developments. You want to have it.
Yeah, and that's because it hasn't been developed with the fire from our side, so it's sat there, it's ready to be used, but we haven't had the resource to allocate to it at the moment. So in terms of the sort of TPR reporting, I did check with the team, and there were about 5 cases that were flagged as sort of cases, but they were actually waiting with Avon Fire and Rescue to get back to us on those where we had missing addresses, and more concern around that was that they were for active members rather than deferred, so the deferreds were all up together, so all those checks happened before we run the extract, so for the annual benefit statements and so on. So.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just, the reason I'm keen, I know the TPR metrics aren't perfect, but I think they give an idea of data quality, which is obviously separate from KPIs, and I think and so it's important in general, but I think it's also useful from an insurance point of view because of that transition which is happening. Is obviously knowing that there's clean data as much as is possible, and noting all the complications and things like McLeod and stuff going across to the administration, which is the reason why I sort of push the point a little bit. So it would be useful to have that, even if we could have it before the next meeting. I don't know what's a suitable time frame to sit, because it would be useful after. I mean, if the delays, I mean, obviously, I'm coming from an independent viewpoint, so whether the delays are with some of the data quality, whether it's back with,
Yeah, okay, so we can do that outside of this meeting, we can submit, I can take that back and try and see what we can get submitted to yourselves.
yeah, obviously it's consent to the project director as well.
And I suppose at this stage it's immaterial whether the cases that are outstanding at the moment on the TPR, you know, you want to see the score, overall score, or the data quality, that's
I'd like to see the score, and I guess for the ones where there are failures, it's knowing what they are and how significant they are. I mean, some of them are self-explanatory. For example, if it's an address, that's sort of obvious what the significance of that is. Just need to kind of communicate with the person. For some of the more technical ones, it's probably knowing whether that's just almost like a technical failure on the system, or whether it's suggesting some actual underlying problem. Like, for example, if you had something like a more technical one, you might come up with a failure, say on the GMP screen or something, which might be just some technical thing which makes no difference to what the person's being paid. But if it was a different type of error, maybe it does.
Yeah.
So again, it's sort of useful knowing that. I'm hoping the numbers are relatively small, so it's not too difficult to actually just look into them and then provide us with that assurance. Because I said, I know they said the TPR measures are not perfect, but they're a guide to data quality, and they're a guide to other underlying issues. That's why they're useful to have. But yeah, I mean, maybe you can come back to some more thoughts of what you think is a suitable time frame. It'd be useful to have, given we're only meeting twice a year, it'd be useful to have it before the next meeting, but with all the reminded about how long it takes to pull that together.
Yeah, absolutely, and if I could say in the autumn, say October, would that be agreeable?
Yeah. That's fine. Any other questions? Okay. That item's just related, so we'll move on to item 10, which is Angie is going to cover.
Hi members, so this is the scrutiny report, short, it's got quite a lengthy title, and pages 71 to 103 in your packs. I am presenting this paper today on behalf of Robin, who's our technical pension advisor, who's on leave today. So please don't be gentle with your highly technical questions and data, but we can follow up on those kind of afterwards if and as needed. I'll run through the paper and then we can go through the recommendations at the end. So in terms of background, as you've seen these reports before, it's a routine report to assist the local pension board in combination with the other papers to ensure good governance of firefighter pension schemes. I'll go through the main governance aspects first, and then I'll turn to the key project updates. So since the last LPB, sorry, lots of acronyms in the world of fire, you need to make sure you get them right. That you'll see in the report that there's been no breaches of law reported, and all the compliance deadlines have either been met in advance, or are on track according to the deadlines. There's been no discretions which have been requested or applied. You'll see there has been one complaint which went to IDRP stage 1, which related to a decision that the chief and I had made as per your delegations from fire authority not to apply immediate detriment to a particular case. That went to IDRP stage 1 to members, and the view of the chief and I was upheld, and so immediate detriment was not applied, and stage 2 was not activated by the individual. In terms of risk management, so that's your risk register at Appendix 1 or A. Just to talk you through the amendments and the changes to that risk register, just for ease of reference for you. So the risk register has been changed. That's LPB02. So I'll take you to the page for that, which is page 87 in your pack, and that's been reduced from 17 to 15. And the commentary there should have been amended to say probable and moderate, and downgraded further to yellow as a result of that. Why that's been reduced is that's reflective of the information which was requested but then received by payroll, which was around assurances for how they ensured correct contributions were taken from members. So as we had a response to that and follow-up question, that's why that risk score has reduced. The second area where it's been amended is LPB3. So this is page 88 of your pack. It hasn't changed in terms of the score, but it has changed in terms of the content to reflect that we have done the auto-enrolment, which we are required to do every 3 years. So that's the amendment to that one. The other amendments have been set LPB09 and LPB15, and I'll take both of those lists together because they link, because primarily they're around training. So LPB9 has reduced from 17 to 15. So that should also now be listed as probable to moderate, and have gone from amber to yellow. We will correct that in future papers. And also LPB15 has reduced from 21 to 20, and should now be listed as amber. The reasons for the changes in those ones where they've reduced, but only slightly, is because whilst we're having some information from members around completion of the toolkit and training, we don't have a full picture of that. And at the same time, we have got a transition lead director, and so therefore Richard also needs to get up to speed also with this, but also complete the toolkit. So we tried to balance that out in those changes in risk score by reducing them slightly because we have got more information than we had, but we have a new challenge in also the training with the new lead. In terms of the work programme, which is your appendix, please. That's page 81 and 82 of your pack. You'll see there that some actions have been completed, so therefore the annual report, which is later on your agenda, and the IDRP policy, which has been earlier on in the agenda. And where other ones where there are particular independencies, so for example with the governance review and the review of the corporate risk register, those have been delayed because we need to wait until the things which they're dependent on are completed. So you'll see that that's reflected in those work programmes as well. Moving on to your project updates. So these are in pages 75 to 78 of your pack. Apologies, I know that I'm taking you around the paper in a different order, so I'm hoping you keep track of the kind of pages. Put your hand up if you're thinking of. Turning to the age discrimination remedy first, so what we call the McLeod Sargent. As you will have seen from the legislative update from Baines, legislation continues to be produced by the government, and you will have seen that there's a number of consultations, in particular around remedy and also the tax aspect of that. And once approved, there will be guidance issued, which will obviously be key to us in processing rather than just using the legislation, so we do need that guidance as well. The software to enable us to process remedy in a consistent and electronic way is also making progress nationally, but we need the outcome again for the consultation to finalise what they call phase 3 of that software. Internally, we continue to have that key stakeholder working groups, one at a strategic level and one at a more tactical level. And that's with key fire service personnel, but also our payroll provider and also our current pension administrator. And we look at various things there, which is reviewing the legislation, what it's telling us, looking at data collation and validation for all the various different groups, staff communications and national updates. We're very linked into the LGA updates, and we regularly go to their update sessions, and also involved in the software testing directly, and also working with LGA to run through a number of case studies. In terms of communications, we do communicate when there's anything key with members and retirees, and we also have a dedicated internal email box for queries. The position remains the same with immediate detriment, which is that it is paused, but we still have the exceptional case provision. And as you can see from the paper, at the time of writing that paper, there were 4 cases that had been considered through that exceptional route, one of which had been approved, one approved in parts, and the remainder of those ones were no. So that's operating, I think, in the way that you intended, members. It didn't hit in time for the paper, but LGA recently, as part of their bulletin, provided a remedy and self-assessment readiness tool. So we run ourselves through, that's not an easy thing to say, is it? We've run ourselves through that, and it takes us through, where you are with your resourcing, where you are with your data, where you are with various other technical things, which I won't run through for you. But we've run that through, and pleased to report that our self-assessment percentage is that we are 83% ready for the implementation of remedy, and the areas where we're not quite ready is because we are waiting for that legislation to be in place, and then for guidance and waiting for the software. So, from my perspective, pleased with how that working group is working to make sure that we're in a good position with reference to remedy. A couple more updates to go, then I'll pause for breath and then I'll obviously take any questions. So moving on to Matthews, so this is the on-call, so this is around our on-call staff having access to pension schemes comparative to whole time. That's further to a previous exercise, so before it was the ability to go back to July 2000 and now to April 2000. Similar position that you would have seen also in Baines' report, that legislation is also going through with reference to Matthews, and as are the software and the calculation process for how we're going to calculate and process Matthews. Again, that it's the same working group, so we have a working group at that strategic and tactical level, looking at remedy for Matthews and also for McLeod Sargent. That's important to do them together because there are kind of linkages or the similar things that we need to look at, and it looks also as if they are going to be implemented at around the same time. So it's important that we look at that together, both in terms of impact on our risks and impact on our resourcing. So that's why we do that in that way. We're looking quite heavily at data collection and validation at the moment, and also linked to that staff communication. So we've sent out a number of internal pieces of correspondence. We've done posters on stations with a QR code, which is proving quite popular for people to just be able to look at that on their phone and provide what's needed. And also sending letters out to last name addresses just to see whether we can establish that they're not sending financial information at the moment, it's just establishing whether the person we think is living at that address is still living at that address. So that's in terms of Matthews. The other one is the change of our pension provider, which we've spoken about board members, and I previously shared the procurement timetable. I'm pleased to report that we are on track with that procurement timetable, and we do now have a new provider. At time of writing paper, we were still in standstill, so I couldn't say who they were, but I can now confirm that it has been awarded to West Yorkshire. They are a pension administrator who have a number of fire and rescue services, therefore they have experience of that, and also they have a lot of experience in transition of pension schemes into them as an administrator. So we are really working with them on a detailed transition plan. There's a detailed transition plan between providers, but there's also a project resource going into it from the service. We've been with Baines for an awfully long time, so a lot of our systems and processes are quite embedded in Baines' way of working. So we recognise that there will be a change for staff as well, so we're doing that as a proper kind of change programme at the same time. And as you can see, that's we've got a particular strand on that in the risk register. We do have a significant handover period, which was always the intention, because we're trying to do this at a time of complexity. So, as you'll be aware, the base contract runs out at the end of March, so we do have this considerable period of time now. So, before one of those runs out, that concludes the scrutiny report, but obviously we're happy to take questions.
A couple of things, thank you for that. One that just occurred to me, you mentioned the IDRP, the one complaint that's been dealt with was a complaint about a decision made by the chief.
Yeah.
Now that we've just agreed that it will be the chief who does the, well, presumably he couldn't do that if it was about his own decision. Do we have a fallback plan should that arise again?
Yeah, I think there, from memory, there is a provision in the IDRP for the chief to move it up to committee if they are going to be involved in that decision.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And the other thing is around the risk around training. Is somebody nagging us if we haven't done what we should have done? Because I think I have, but if I'm one of the gaps, then I'm living in blissful ignorance of it, and I just need somebody to poke me and tell me that I need to do something.
Okay, yeah, I think they are being centrally collated, so what we'll do is then compare and contrast, and then we'll come back to individuals.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see if there's any more questions. I have a few. Well, some of them are just comments as well. So with regard to the Bristol City Council, because I was pushing that point a little bit on getting insurance, so I know you haven't seen it, but I've seen the email come back where they just explained what has happened. They weren't able, unfortunately, to attend today. I was more just looking for some assurance around the processes around how the contribution plans were worked out, which they provided. The sort of comment stroke question I had on Matthews was that I know that there's a responsibility to sort of go through sort of reasonable endeavours to track people down. It was just a suggestion about whether by using a tracing service, if there are people who we still can't find. They're used quite widely in the pensions administration sort of industry, but I mean we use them routinely in my sort of day job, if you like. Each year when we have a number of return addresses, we use them to find people. They won't find absolutely everybody, but they will find people. It's not necessarily, I think probably for the numbers we're talking about here, it wouldn't be significantly expensive, I don't think, and it could be worthwhile doing. So just a suggestion to look into. Particularly I think because in say a normal sort of environment, normally the reason you don't know is because maybe there's a bit of responsibility on the member themselves that they haven't told you they've updated the address. It's a bit different in this circumstance because we're talking potentially about when we're talking about ex-employees, they wouldn't have had any need to update around the address. There's a bit more, so the sort of balance of responsibilities may be slightly different here. But as I said, this is within the context of having to be reasonable levels, but it's just a suggestion to look into. I'm assuming we did just touch on this before the meeting, that sort of where, because I understood that the tracking the people down was being done here, but I'm assuming that Baines
do have tracing agency that we use. I know I provided Robin with reports and so on about anyone who's exited the scheme that we've got a record of. So yes, it could be, and we do the tracing as part of the TPR reporting and trying to ensure our records are up to date. So that does take place.
Yeah, it depends on the breakdown of staff. Obviously, there could be some people who opted out or whatever they did. So there could be people who transferred out, so you don't have any active liability for it. So it depends on the exact scenario.
Yeah, so I'll take that suggestion back to the group, albeit it looks like Robin is already discussing that as an option with Baines as part of that data validation and verification process that's going on at the moment.
Next thing I was just going to say was just for information that I have been involved in some of the meetings to do with the transition across to the new provider. As I said, I don't think in my role in my chair it's not really appropriate for me to be sort of heavily involved as such. It's more the intention was just to go to some of the virtual meetings just to have a bit of an overview of what was happening really. That said, I'm partly doing that because from my perspective it's obviously it's a significant change and that there's a lot of complexity involved in this, so there is risk, but on the same side I don't have any concerns about it. I mean, we're getting to an established provider. I think on both sides there's significant experience of doing this sort of thing before, so I don't have any particular concerns, but it's just because of the significance of it. It's still something which I think I'm keen for us to sort of oversee, and obviously within the context of that meeting cycle, etc. The pace this would move on. But yeah, so it's as Andy said earlier, we're on track. Everything is going to plan so far. As far as I can see, there's no major issues, and it's just maybe just carry on with the careful management. See there, everything should hopefully run smoothly, quite easy so far. So that's just really a comment, really, rather than a question. On the risk register, I know it's been pushed back a little bit because some of that's probably linked to the governance stuff. I would probably welcome a sort of review of the format. I probably won't say too much more really this time, but I just wonder about the format. There's bits which could be updated a little bit, but that's not really a major point. It's just probably more of a comment. Is there anything else anybody wants to add on this item? Okay. So most of this is just for noting. Is everybody happy with the work plan? Let's probably get a bit to agree. Yeah. Okay. We're happy with that. We'll move on to the next item, which I'm actually presenting because it's the annual report. So that's item and the draft annual report. I'll assume that everybody has read this. I won't go through this in great depth. There's not a huge amount of information in the cover paper. That's the reports there as an appendix. The format is much the same as what is being used in previous versions of this, previous editions, because there seemed no real reason to change it. Linking back to item 7, particularly because the change that we agreed at that point, I think this becomes a key point of just of transparency. In some ways, regardless of whether lots of people read it or not, it's there as it's being about being transparent and putting it out there and showing what we are doing. In terms of some of the content itself, you will see in the forward that I sort of stress what I see as our particular key priorities, which I think in my mind is the large two are sort of a cloud sergeant type case and the procurement activities. I think those are the two key areas which I think we should be most focused on with Matthews as the sort of third. And obviously we're talking about other items as well, but I think those are one of the big ones which I consider to be our focus. I think the rest of the document is largely there as a sort of management of fact, summarisation of what we've covered in our meetings, and it's drawn from that. So there's probably not too much more to say, because that should just be a representation of what's actually happened, really. So that is the report itself. So the recommendations are to consider the report and then approve its presentation to PRC. But before we do that, is there any sort of questions or comments on that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Andy. Just on page, under the training section on the annual report, page 8, you talk about monthly bulletins from LGA Pension Advisory Service. I haven't seen any of those monthly bulletins. Is that something we should all be getting?
It should be, so we can look into that. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, well, if nobody is, I was understood that you were getting them, so we might need to amend that in case you haven't actually been receiving them.
And also, just under the specific work programme, it's entitled 2022-23, shouldn't it be 23-24? Am I misreading that?
No, we did spot. We did spot that at the last minute, so yeah, we will get that.
Just proving to Amanda I do actually read the report.
I have seen her.
So that was just left in as a bit of a test. But yes, we have spotted that, so we will update that, and we'll look at the other points around the communication of the bulletins. We can, I think it would be worth, a lot of them are fairly technical, but I mean you can always pick out the bits which that are useful, so we can arrange that to either be added to distribution list directly from the LGA
Or
or for the monitoring.
yeah, or I think what might be more useful is just to send you all the link to where they are stored, because then you can go in kind of as and when they're all on the websites, and then if you so minded you could read all the back catalogue as well. So I think that's probably to cut down on the paper each for coming out, just to show you where they're stored on the LG website.
I don't spend too long talking about this, but for me, I'd rather it just landed in my inbox once a month. Because frankly, if you send me a link, I'll look at it once and then I'll forget and I'll never look at it again. If it lands in my inbox every month, there's a much better chance of actually going to read it.
Okay, does everyone feel the same, or do I want to do a combination?
Probably so it was Steve. If it wasn't emailed to me, I might forget to get back to it.
Okay.
So I think a monthly email would be really useful,
Okay.
but perhaps with the link as well.
Okay, we'll do both, that's fine.
Yeah, I think we could probably just ask the LGA to add it to the list where there's no additional work for officers that way.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm just mindful that they are quite long and quite technical kind of ones, so they're almost ones that you want to dip in and out of reading. But yeah, that's fine. We can do that.
Obviously, if we're saying we're getting them, then we should get them. So
Yeah, as I said, I do look at them, but I mean, if I'm honest, I don't read through all of it because there's a fair bit of it which is aimed at the actual administrators, but I think it's providing a bit of an overview of what's there. And obviously, if you're on the mailing list, you will see other things outside of the bulletins as well. Okay. Any other questions on this item?
No, I was going to say, Andy, thank you for putting this together on our behalf. I think it's no longer than it needs to be, and it reads in plain English for those who don't follow this as closely as we do. So, very good, thank you.
No problem. I will say I have just inherited a format which I think worked in terms of being quite to the point, and it's not overly long like you might get with some annual reports. So it is, I think, fairly easy for people to read and to the point. If we just take a vote on approving this presentation to PRC, not sensing any sort of objection to this, so we just go to vote to approve. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Move on to any other business. Does anybody have any other business? That's great. No. Probably just use this opportunity to say thank you to Angie for all the support on the board since before I started. Because this will be our last meeting with us. I'm sure we will see you again at some point. Maybe I hope you don't otherwise. I'm sure we will, but thank you very much.
Don't be too happy about that.
It's been a pleasure. I am doing policy and resources, so I will then still be there for pension decisions and things like that. Talking all around immediate detriment on an ongoing basis. Thank you.
Okay, there's no any other business. Date of next meeting is Thursday, 25th of January at 10:30.